I never believed that a single evening could redraw the boundaries of my life, but when I look back now, I can trace everything to that quiet moment when I agreed to go to his house. At the time, it felt harmless. Almost necessary. I told myself I was only seeking conversation, a break from the silence that had been growing between me and the person I was supposed to love. My name is Ethan, and for 2 years, I had been in a relationship with Lucas. From the outside, we looked stable, even enviable. We shared an apartment, divided responsibilities, planned small trips, and smiled in photos. Yet somewhere between routine dinners and polite goodnights, something essential had slipped away. Lucas wasn't unkind or cruel, he was simply distant in a way that felt heavier than anger. Our conversations had become practical instead of personal. We discussed bills, schedules, and groceries, but rarely our fears, our dreams, or the small details that once made us feel close. At first, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was asking for too much, expecting constant reassurance or emotional warmth. But the truth was harder to ignore. I felt invisible in my own relationship. I could sit next to Lucas on the couch for hours, and still feel like I was alone in the room. Love, I was learning, could exist without connection, and that realization was more unsettling than any argument. That was around the time Noah entered my life more clearly. We had known each other casually through work, exchanging polite greetings and occasional jokes, but one evening we stayed late and started talking. Not the superficial kind of talking, but the kind where time fades and you forget to check your phone. Noah listened in a way that surprised me. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He remembered things I said, even the small, unimportant ones. For the first time in months, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in who I was, not just what I did. Our conversations became a quiet habit. Short messages turned into long ones, and long ones turned into something I started looking forward to more than I wanted to admit. I never told Noah much about Lucas, and I never told Lucas about Noah. I told myself that was normal, that everyone needed friends, that I wasn't crossing any lines. But deep down, I knew there was a difference between friendship and the kind of emotional comfort I was beginning to seek. One afternoon, Noah sent me a simple message: "Do you want to come over tonight? We could just talk." The word just made it sound innocent, almost insignificant. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My first instinct was to say no, to create distance before things became complicated. But another part of me, the tired and lonely part, wanted to go. I wanted to feel understood again, even if only for a few hours. Lucas was working late that night. He barely looked up when I told him I might go out for a while. He nodded, distracted, and returned to his laptop. That small moment hurt more than I expected. It felt like permission, even though I hadn't asked for any. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment with a strange mix of guilt and excitement twisting in my chest. On the way to Noah's place, I kept rehearsing explanations in my head. "It's just a visit. We're only talking. There's nothing wrong with that." Each thought sounded reasonable on its own, but together they felt like excuses. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, only that I didn't want to feel empty anymore. Noah lived in a quiet building across town, the kind where the lights in the windows told silent stories about other people's lives. When he opened the door, he smiled in that effortless way that always made me feel at ease. There was no awkwardness, no tension I could openly name, just a familiar warmth that felt dangerously comforting. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. As I crossed the threshold into his apartment, I felt a subtle shift inside myself, like I had moved from one version of my life into another without fully understanding the consequences. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew, with unsettling clarity, that something had already begun to change. And I wasn't sure I still had the courage to stop it. Noah's apartment was quieter than I expected, the kind of silence that felt intentional rather than empty. A single lamp cast a warm glow across the living room, softening the edges of everything it touched. The space reflected him, simple, organized, calm. It made me aware of how tense I had been lately, how rarely I allowed myself to relax without thinking about what was expected of me. "Make yourself comfortable," Noah said, setting his phone aside as if I were the only thing that mattered in the room. I sat on the couch, unsure what to do with my hands, my thoughts, my presence. He brought 2 glasses of water, and we started talking about nothing in particular: work, music, small annoyances. It felt easy, almost too easy. There was no pressure to perform or impress. I didn't have to pretend I was okay when I wasn't. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could simply exist. The conversation shifted naturally, without warning, into something deeper. Noah told me about his last relationship, how it ended because he felt emotionally neglected. He laughed it off at first, but I noticed the hesitation in his voice, the way he avoided eye contact for a moment too long. Something about his honesty made me respond in kind. That I told him about Lucas, not everything. Just enough that I described the distance, the routine, the way I felt like a background character in my own relationship. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't prepared for. I had spent months convincing myself that things weren't that bad, that I was overthinking, but hearing my own words exposed how lonely I truly was. Noah didn't interrupt. He didn't offer quick solutions or empty encouragement. He simply listened, nodding occasionally, letting silence exist without rushing to fill it. That silence felt different from the one I shared with Lucas. This one felt attentive, not indifferent. I know that feeling, Noah said softly. Being with someone but still feeling alone. His words settled into me, warm and unsettling at the same time. There was comfort in being understood, but also danger. I could sense myself leaning into that comfort, craving it, letting it become something I relied on. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I felt a boundary shift inside me. At some point, the conversation slowed. Not because we had run out of things to say, but because neither of us seemed eager to speak. The room felt smaller, not physically, but emotionally. I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, how our shoulders almost touched. It wasn't planned. It just happened, the way meaningful moments often do, quietly, without permission. Noah reached for his glass, and his hand brushed against mine. It was an ordinary gesture, accidental even, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I froze, caught between instinct and intention. The touch lingered for a second longer than necessary. That second felt heavier than any confession I could have made. In my mind, Lucas appeared suddenly, uninvited. I imagined him at home, focused on his screen, unaware of where I was or what I was feeling. The thought should have pushed me to stand up, to apologize, to leave. Instead, it filled me with a complicated mix of guilt and resentment. I felt guilty for being here, but resentful for feeling invisible in my own relationship. Noah noticed my hesitation. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice careful, almost hesitant. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure it was true. "Yeah. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk." He smiled, but there was something different in it now, something more restrained, more aware. As if he, too, understood that we were standing near a line neither of us had clearly defined. Yet neither of us moved to redraw it. We sat in silence again, but this time it felt charged, like an unspoken question hung between us. I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just comfort. It was connection. The kind that forms when someone sees the parts of you you've been hiding, even from yourself, and that was the moment it became undeniable. Nothing dramatic happened. No declarations, no sudden decisions. Just two people sitting too close, sharing too much, feeling something that wasn't supposed to exist. But I understood, with quiet certainty, that something essential had already shifted. I hadn't kissed Noah. I hadn't touched him again. Yet emotionally, I had stepped into a space that didn't belong to me. I had always believed that cheating was defined by action, by what you did with your body. Sitting there, in Noah's softly lit living room, I realized how wrong that belief was. I had crossed a line without moving an inch. I had given someone else the part of me that was meant to belong to Lucas, and for the first time, I couldn't pretend I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I left Noah's apartment later than I intended, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the quiet night outside. The streets were nearly empty, the city wrapped in a calm that felt undeserved. Every step I took toward home felt heavier than the last, as if my body understood what my mind was still trying to deny. I hadn't done anything that could be easily labeled as betrayal, yet I felt like I was already guilty of something irreversible. The air was cold, but it didn't clear my thoughts. Instead, it sharpened them. I replayed every moment in Noah's living room, the way he listened, the way I opened up, the way I didn't stop myself when I should have. It wasn't just what had happened, but what I had allowed myself to feel. I realized I had been searching for connection in the wrong place, not because Noah was wrong, but because I had never fully faced what was missing with Lucas. When I reached the apartment, the lights were still on. Lucas was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, exactly as I had imagined. He looked up when he heard the door and smiled faintly, as if nothing significant had changed. That small normality felt unbearable. I suddenly understood that pretending everything was fine would be the real lie. "How was your night?" Lucas asked. The question was simple, but it felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I sat beside him, leaving just enough space to notice the distance. My chest tightened, and for a moment I considered giving him an easy answer, something casual that wouldn't disrupt the fragile peace we still had. But the silence between us had already done enough damage. I didn't want to add another layer to it. "I went to see someone," I said carefully. "A friend." Lucas nodded at first, then paused, sensing the hesitation in my voice. "And?" I struggled to find words that wouldn't hurt him but would still be honest. "Nothing happened," I said, quickly, then stopped myself. "At least, nothing physical. But I think I crossed a line." He looked at me fully now, the phone forgotten in his hand. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, feeling exposed in a way I never had before. "I talked to him about things I haven't talked to you about in a long time. I felt understood. And I liked it. Maybe more than I should have." Lucas didn't react immediately. His face didn't show anger or disappointment, just a quiet confusion that somehow felt worse. He leaned back against the couch, processing what I had said, as if he were trying to translate it into something concrete. "So you didn't cheat," he said slowly. "But you wanted to." The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. "I don't know what I wanted," I replied. "I just know that something's not right anymore. And I don't want to pretend it is." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't comfortable or meaningful. It was heavy, full of things we had avoided for too long. Lucas rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture I recognized as frustration, or maybe exhaustion. "I thought we were just in a phase," he said. "I didn't realize you felt this disconnected." "I tried to tell you," I said quietly. "Maybe not directly, but I tried." He nodded, slowly, as if acknowledging a truth he had resisted. "So what happens now?" The question lingered between us, unanswered. I realized that I didn't have a clear solution, only a growing awareness that staying the same wasn't an option anymore. We had built our relationship on comfort and routine, and now we were facing the cost of neglecting the emotional part of it. "I think we need space," I said, the words feeling both necessary and cruel. "Not because I want to leave you for someone else, but because I need to understand what I actually want. And you deserve honesty, even if it's uncomfortable." Lucas looked down, his expression unreadable. "Space doesn't always lead back," he said. "I know," I replied. "But staying like this won't lead anywhere either." That night, we slept in the same bed but felt miles apart. No arguments, no dramatic exit, just two people quietly realizing that something important had shifted. The trust between us wasn't broken completely, but it was cracked, and I didn't know if it could be repaired. Lying awake, I thought about Noah, about Lucas, about myself. I understood that the real conflict wasn't between two men, but within me. I had mistaken emotional neglect for emotional absence, and instead of confronting it, I had looked for fulfillment elsewhere. That I didn't know what my future would look like after that night. I only knew that I couldn't go back to being unaware. I had crossed an invisible boundary, and in doing so, I had learned something uncomfortable but necessary. Love isn't just about staying, it's about choosing, every day, to be present, honest, and responsible for the hearts we hold.